One of the things that has become very clear to me in the past few years is the importance of having a strong foundation on the preliminary practices and the Buddhist worldview before engaging in advanced practices. Of course, that's not what I did. So this is purely hindsight. And that's also, I went straight to Tantra, and that's also what many people do nowadays. And so, looking back, I can see that it would have made a great difference in my practice, in my approach, in my understanding, in my spiritual development, to have had that foundation, particularly the foundation on the 4 thoughts that turn the mind to the Dharma, before engaging in tantric practice or going to tantric initiation. So these 4 preliminaries are also included in the 7-point mind training commentary, Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun by Nan Capel. And so I have really grown to appreciate and value what these practices bring to my practice and how I see the world and how I moved in the world. So the first of those practices is precious human life, and both the rarity of it, the value of it, and the causes of it. And because it's a practice that is associated with a path in common with the initial scope, one might think that this is an easy practice, that this is something easy to understand. And it really is not. Because when we are looking at the different conditions that go into having a precious human life, when we're talking about its causes, when we're talking about its characteristics, the eight freedoms and the 10 fortunes, then we are already sort of massaging the Buddhist worldview. We're already entering into talking about rebirth. We're already talking about karma and its effects. So we are already stretching the mind beyond what all of us here who were born in the West, are used to. So even though it's considered one of those preliminary practices, even I think for the beginner that I was, this was actually would have been a very advanced practice. It was already would have required a big amount of contemplation and meditation. And so then the second of these preliminary practices is impermanence and death. And again, what a shocker to even think that the certainty of death, what a shocker to contemplate that, the uncertainty of the time of death, and also what a revelation to contemplate that Dharma is the only thing that is helpful at the time of death. So with these so-called preliminary practices, I can see how much the mind needs to grow, how much we're already setting the foundation for practices such as the higher training in ethical conduct. You're already setting the foundation for the practices of the middle scope. Not only that, but these 2 practices, precious human life and impermanence and death, these 2 topics are the 2 topics that Lama Tsongkhapa, in the 3 principal aspects of the path, in his instructions, he instructs us to meditate repeatedly on these 2 points as a way to reverse the clinging to this life. So this is already something that we're starting to massage to generate renunciation, to generate complete and thorough renunciation. So these practices are setting the tapestry that we need to weave as we move forward to the advanced practices. They're definitely not something that I would have wanted to skip over, that I would have wanted to sort of put aside and even think that I could move forward without them. And so these two practices already also speak of refuge. When we're talking about a precious human life, when we're talking about impermanence and death, what is it that allows us to really take advantage of these? What is it that allows us to face impermanence and death with some level of I would say, calmness and dignity and wisdom? Well, that's refuge. Our refuge allows us to take the utmost use of these two reflections to progress along the path. So for that reason, these practices that are in common with practitioners of the initial scope, are also included in their development of refuge. And I find that these practices also start setting the foundations for even dependent arising. Now, then the other two of the practices that are preliminary practices is for karma and its effects. And I keep asking myself, why is karma and its effects a preliminary practice when we all know that only a Buddha can really understand karma and its effects? So it's like, okay, well, I know that this is a deep topic to understand, that this is going to be difficult. But however, in these preliminary stages, it allows us to posit ethical conduct. And so we know that without ethical conduct, we cannot practice the high training on concentration. We cannot develop wisdom. So even at this stage of the preliminary practices, we're already building up to those other practices. And then the last one is the disadvantages of cyclic existence. So that also, which now it's a little change because the prior three were related to the practice of the initial scope, but now we're shifting with the disadvantages of cyclic existence. This preliminary practice is more in the realm of the practitioners of the middle scope. And this particular practice already posits that we have some understanding of the first two truths, the truth of dukkha and the truth of the origin of dukkha. So again, it would have been so ideal for me as I was sort of beginning my Dharma studies to focus on really understanding the four truths of the Aryas and how they really encompass all of the path to awakening. And then Lama Tsongkhapa then in the two principal aspects of the path instructs us that by repeatedly contemplating karma and its effects, and by repeatedly contemplating the disadvantages of cyclic existence, then we can reverse clinging to future lives. So these preliminary practices really set the stage for the generation of bodhicitta, which is then the following step if we're looking at the mind generation instructions. And then we talk about, in terms of looking at Tantra, which is where I started, it would have been so nice to have these preliminaries, because then knowing that Tantra is all about bodhicitta, I would have then had the foundation to even begin to posit bodhicitta, to even begin to see the practice of Tantra as necessitating or reinforcing the renunciation, reinforcing bodhicitta, reinforcing the practice of wisdom. In the absence of that, trying to generate myself as a deity doesn't really have a context. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Geshe, but again, this is 2020 hindsight, And then Geshe Tashi Tsering wrote that Tantra really is all about bodhicitta, and that there is no point in generating oneself as a deity without it. And I also was the beneficiary of one of Venerable Chodron's remarks on this topic when she said that in order to have robust bodhicitta, we need renunciation, and that without bodhicitta, without renunciation, bodhicitta is flat. So what I find is that all of these preliminary practices that I skipped in the beginning really set the stage and build up like layer after layer after layer of the foundation that is needed to really enter into the practice of Tantra in a competent way, in a way that is able to harness the power of Tantra to get our practice to the next level. And so this is the framework that I'm trying to build now after the fact. But nonetheless, I am really enjoying, my practice is really become enriched by being able to understand this connection, to see it very clearly, and to see the difference that it has made in my practice. And even though I am very grateful that I entered into Buddhism through the doorway of Tantra, I'm very grateful because it really connected me with some very beautiful and special beings like Krishnensha Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Shoden Rinpoche, some of these beautiful luminaries of the Buddhist world that I just so appreciate. At the same time, I wish I had understood that engaging in the preliminaries was a helpful thing to do. And that would have made a great difference. So that's my whole premise of this BBC, is to encourage those of you who may be considering tantric practice to really look at how you're integrating these preliminary practices into what you're doing, and to really work on establishing them firmly in your mind, because you will notice that it will completely change your relationship to Tantra. It will completely change how you do your practice, and it will bring much richness and depth to it. So.